inside the Freelancers studio. And joining me this afternoon are Brandon Bovia. Brandon, hello. Jan Mitsuko Cash.
Hello.
Molly Rabbitt. Are we calling you Molly or Mary today?
Okay, Molly. Yeah. I hate my legal name. So yeah, that's me. Hi.
And Patrick Sutton.
Hello.
Hello. For people that I've worked with in different type of capacities, people that I respect in also different type of capacities. No offense, you're all great. And for people who I would like to see out there a lot more in manga as well as light novels, people who I've seen work of for a little while. In most cases, I think Patrick's a little newer than the rest, and all coming from very different perspectives on the localization process. We have a letterer designer. We've got a couple translators, someone who does proofreading, and in my case, as someone who's had to do a little bit of all of that in their career, I think it's pretty. This should be a very interesting conversation to have, to give you, the listener, an opportunity to kind of get a little bit of insight of maybe some of the difficulties, some of the challenges, and maybe some of the positive and more entertaining parts about working in manga. We're not going to cover every little element, obviously. We've only got about an hour or so. But at least in regards to the localization, we can cover a couple of topics and maybe even create an opportunity for different parts of that greater localization puzzle to maybe interact with each other in a new and maybe positive way as well. So without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce to you guys, the panelists who we just heard from briefly. Let's start off with Brandon. A little bit of your past and maybe a couple examples of titles that people may have heard or read that you've worked on.
Yeah. So my name is Brandon Bovia. I'm a freelance manga letterer. I've been at it for just over 3 years now. And I freelance for all sorts of companies. Yeah, almost every major publisher in the manga business here in North America. And I work on titles for DENPA readers, you might recognize, like Pleasure and Corruption and Heavenly Delusion. And I do series for other publishers like Dragon Ball Super, Transformers the manga, many others.
All right. And then let's continue with Jan Mitsuko Cash.
Hi. So I'm a Japanese to English translator, and I mainly work on light novels, but I also do some manga. One notable one is Baby Bear Bakery, which is a DENPA title, and incredibly cute. Very, very fun to work on.
How about a couple words from you, Molly?
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a Japanese to English translator, and I've kind of worked with almost every media out there in terms of form. I've done games, novels. I'm tackling nonfiction right now. But most of my wheelhouse is in manga.
Any specific titles that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I think the one that I'm proudest of to date that's already out is Wonderland, and that one is with 7 Seas. And then I've got one more in the pipeline, which I'm not sure I can talk about yet, so I'm not going to. But I've also done stuff like Fairy Tale Battle Royale, and most recently for DENPA, I did Miss Kusakabe.
All right, and then Patrick.
Hi, and as far as the manga industry concerns, I've been working as a freelance marketing person for a couple years now, working on stuff like these panels with Ed, but then I've also been working as a proofreader for about, a year and a half now on stuff like Heavenly Delusion and Girl with the Sanpaku Eyes and a couple others I don't remember the names of off the top of my head.
All right. So let's go. Let's start off with Jan, and you guys can just hop on in. A common question that I tend to get from readers specifically is how do you get into localization work? Obviously, a lot of people have that type of interest as well, and y'all have been very fortunate to get your skills out there to not just the readership, but also to the publishing companies themselves. So could you share a little bit of how that process process worked for you?
Yeah, so for me, I basically just went to a whole bunch of conventions, anime conventions like Anime Expo, also Anime NYC is another big one, and I just sort of hung around the booths there with where the publishers were and started talking to the editors. I think that another good way to start applying is to just sort of send an email to whatever inbox is open on the publisher's website. So usually they'll have like a general contact form, or they might have a dedicated jobs page where they have all their listings and how to contact them. And basically the first thing to do is just to do your research, figure out what publishers there are. I think that a lot of people don't really think of that at first. They just sort of they just sort of look up how do I get started in translation without really thinking about who is actually doing the hiring. And once you know who you want to apply to, then you just go ahead and do it as soon as you think you're ready. And they'll give you a test usually. And if you pass the test, then you can usually start translating with them once they have projects available.
Do you feel that, I think this is something for Molly too, is like, at least for translation, are tests things that are very common these days from manga publishers?
Infuriatingly so, I'd say, especially because there is no standard throughout the industry as what constitutes a pass or a fail, But actually, for my first series with 7 Cs, I never tested. But I also had work that I'd been doing on the side, and I also did in 2010 to 2012-ish, I did some of the how to draw manga books. So I kind of had those, and I sent whatever samples I had, but almost every other job I've had to test for. They test you for games, they test you for light novels, and yeah, it is kind of everywhere. But in my case, I have been paying attention to who puts out manga since the late 90s. I've been into manga since I was like 10, so it's like over 20 years now. But I started paying attention at who was putting it out, and once I was in college, I actually programmed my career path towards that. And then I just started kind of knocking on doors, and I kind of kept knocking until people paid attention. Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing you could do sometimes.
I mean, I guess like the manga industry, despite there being a lot of content, at least these days, it isn't as big as people may think also, right?
Yeah.
Like, technically, there are only like 6 or 7 publishers, so...
I would say that this is actually a fairly incestuous industry kind of within that regard, but for lack of a better term, kind of, I mean, there are a lot of up-and-coming smaller publishers. I do work with Futekia and Manga Planet on the side, and they're definitely trying to bring more stuff to both the West and Southeast Asia. But I'd say right now we're actually seeing the rise of stuff like Webtoon and other more simply designed manga platforms and manhwa platforms that are kind of coming to the fore. But in terms of big companies, I think Ed is right. There's maybe 6 or 7 tops, with a whole smattering of smaller companies trying to kind of push in on the digital platform.
How about you, Brandon?
I'll be honest. I looked my way into freelancing manga lettering super hard. So I do get this question asked a lot, actually, and I feel bad because I'm just sort of like, I was in the right place at the right time for
Nice.
a lot of my like working relationships. It can go from just like apply. I had 0 experience and just applied and took a test, and that's how I got my first gig. And then like I met an editor once by playing video games with him. I met another associate editor whose name I I don't even remember, and I don't know if he's still at the company, but I met an associate editor at a convention for like 5 minutes and passed on my email. And that's how I've gotten, consistent work somewhere else. And it's just like, so,
luck definitely plays into things, and people don't really know that.
well, yeah, it is a whole lot of luck, which that sucks for anybody who's trying to make a break.
Yeah, but that's also most business, so it's not like a thing that's unique, really.
Yeah, for sure. I can say that, once you have that first foot in the door, knowing how to communicate and knowing how to, I would say, like, reduce friction between yourself and the work and the client, so that way that you can keep getting more and more contracts, putting your name out there. And so if you can be like known and trusted as a reliable person who won't make much trouble for you, then, editors and project managers will want to hire you. And it just sort of, I would like to think that it becomes a snowball effect, if you are, if you can maintain those sorts of like good working relationships. But yeah, getting your foot in is absolutely the hardest part. And no, I would say no to people have done it the exact same way.
I mean, as someone who hires, I feel that knowing people is basically, sadly, like the key thing, more so than sending out like a bazillion resumes. I'm not necessarily going to say that like I haven't seen like good portfolios come in and just be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to toss this, right? But for the most part, like I said, as someone who does a lot of hiring, has done so for close to about 10 years now, a lot of that is networking, just knowing the people, hearing about people through other people. And like Molly said, things are very incestuous. It is a very small community. How about you, Trick?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not a secret to a lot of people that like you and I are good friends, right? Like, and yeah, exactly. So like for me, like all of this, yeah. I mean, I did some marketing stuff with you a couple years ago, and then it's kind of spiraled from there, doing other things, and then I was kind of looking for work and was fortunate enough to have an opportunity, and I took it and have kind of just stuck with it from that point. And I don't think like there's no, the way I see this thing is it's like, yeah, it's unfortunate that that's kind of how that stuff works, but I don't think it's a thing people should, it's ultimately not something you should feel guilty about, but instead like encourage, like if you're trying to break into this kind of business, it's going to take more than just having like a great portfolio or something like that. It's going to take like some kind of level of connecting with people, because knowing people is ultimately what people notice.
No, it's funny to frame this like around DENPA, right? Because that's not entirely intentional, even though all of you guys paid by me in some capacity. But at the same time, like just the company as a whole. I mean, it's me and Nicole and now Glenn. We're all just old friends. Like we've known each other for more than 10 years now, like 12, 13 years at this point. We're very comfortable with each other. So even in regards to like management, that's unique. Obviously, that's not going to be the case at Biz. That's not the case at Yen, or even worse in Japan, right? But I feel that going back to just the topic of how small this business is, really having those connections, and on top of that, I think at least with a couple of you, just knowing that you're willing to be flexible. Like Molly's working on a nonfiction book for me, and I'm not too sure if she has too much experience in that, or I wasn't too sure if she had too much experience with that when we first started talking about it. But I kind of trusted in her skill set and and her as a person. So
I'm grateful that you gave me that chance.
Yeah. Well, not a problem. But at the same time, it's like I would rather give those opportunities to people who I do trust, particularly if it's something new. And on top of that, if they're willing to take on that chance, something like with Pat. Pat comes from a marketing background, but I know he's done some editorial online before, so it's like, okay, how about a little proofreading work? Nothing super complicated, but definitely very important, and more than willing to take on these projects. So that flexibility, as well as those connections, really help. I can go on about relationship with Brandon and Jan as well, but we do have other topics to cover. But I think having those connections and also being able to hustle is a lot more critical than people might realize. Just a really quick question for anybody who's experienced this, but have any of you guys worked for an agency that does localization?
Yes.
Very briefly.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about that, or?
I mean, it was when I was starting out. Like, I actually fairly broke into the industry pretty late, comparatively, because I did kind of have a lapsed period there where I was just kind of hustling and trying to get better. And finally, like, I needed a little bit more work on the side to kind of fill out my project list, which is really essential. So I had a friend who referred me to somebody at an agency that does work for Kodansha. And that it was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, it did not end well. And we're seeing a lot of issues with agencies right now. And while I'm grateful I was given the chance to work, but something needs to change.
Anybody else with any experience in that regard?
Yeah, so I worked for one super briefly, with only one project that ended up coming out, and all I can really say is that, like, if you don't know what you're doing, like if you're just starting out and you don't know what standard or what to expect, then that is ripe for like
exploitation
and abusive practices. Right. Not to say that my experience was like particularly abusive, other than the pay rate and the deadline was like just awful and is never something that I would like accept again. But when you don't know any better, you just like, is this normal? Is this how it goes, everywhere else? And so like you let those things just sort of happen to you. And if you're desperate, like if, because I can, like all of us who are here working in manga, we love manga. And so that love of the medium can be abused.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And it does. It happens a lot. Like in my case, I knew the agency I was working for was not paying well, but because for translators, building a project list early is really essential to getting more work. I kind of went with it. I didn't give it too much of my energy. I did my best, but in my case, I actually did know what the score was. But for me, I was like, you know what? I think I'll leverage this though, because I really do need a bigger project list. And usually, sometimes you can get around testing if your project list is big enough and if you've got enough samples that have been either published or aired on TV if you're a subtitler. But in my case, I actually leveraged bad business practices to build my project list. And again, like it's something I'm grateful for, but I sincerely hope that one day all of us can kind of help this change, because especially this year we've seen a lot in anime related news and manga related news about predatory agencies. And it's just kind of becoming more and more of a problem, especially because now we're kind of in a double recession on both sides of the pond, and companies are not going to be more obliged to spend more money on people right now, unless you're like a certain company or another company. But for the most part, especially the ones over in Japan right now, there's little to no incentive to spend more money on people. So
I think something that you brought up, and I guess Brandon as well, but in regards to having like a portfolio, like how critical is that? And like say for example, let's go back to like the agency topic. If you were starting off and and you didn't have the connections, and you're actually very new, and maybe your skill set isn't quite as polished, and you're kind of taking advantage of, or maybe using that opportunity to get enough reps, essentially, right? Kind of like muscle memory. How many projects do you take on before taking that step? Obviously, that's the case by case basis for most people, right? But as someone who has said they understood the game and it kind of worked in your favor, like what would you recommend to someone who was possibly going through that process?
So I would say actually, as a letterer, you don't necessarily need like manga lettering examples in your portfolio.
Oh, wow.
As long as you like the things that you do can demonstrate that you understand how to use software, know like sort of basic design principles, and can follow directions. That one is the most important, honestly.
I would say also being timely.
Yeah, yes, and being timely, being able to follow directions. So it's just like, if you have freelance experience in like graphic design, or you could letter, like web comics, or comics that you draw, or comics that your friends draw, or design logos, that sort of thing. Those sorts of like freelance design work.
Mm-hmm.
I think like a publisher will be able to know, if you know what you're doing or not based off of that. And so I do see a lot of people who are just like, they want to get into manga as soon as possible, and they will take any jobs in manga because it's manga, with the hope of getting better jobs, better paying jobs. And it's like, a lot of times with agencies, you're not allowed to like use that work on portfolios. So it's kind of a fool's errand to begin with.
There's also the NDA issue. Like for Kodansha, I was under like a 1.5-year NDA after I left, and that NDA has recently expired. But I'm hearing for some agencies it's as many as 5 years.
Oh wow,
jeez.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that Aniplex has a 5-year NDA because I worked with them earlier this year, and I have feelings about that, obviously, and that's separate. But but not being able to use work in your portfolio for a translator can be absolutely fatal. It can kill your career because you can talk until the day is long, until the day is long, and you can say, I can do the thing, but if you have no proof, if you don't have it on a resume, or if you don't have actual samples, then you're just talking and people are like, okay, well, we need somebody with actual proof. It's fatal.
So basically, I guess the better track would be to kind of follow what Brandon's saying and just work on your craft instead of going in that other direction.
There are ways to do it without either translation or lettering. There are ways to work on hone your craft without necessarily being abused for it.
I do feel though that those ways are narrowing, especially when we have the suspension of things like the manga translation battle, and especially because this year has been, everything has happened this year. It feels like a lot of, while some people may have more time to finally get into their craft, whether it be translation or lettering or whatever, but then the jobs may not be there, or there may be very strict, like some people won't accept fan sub work, which is a whole nother thing. But for translators, people have gotten super picky, and it's like, if you don't have a JLPT in some circles, like for games, a lot of them want to see a JLPT 2 or above. For some publishers, they want to, like, I can't remember which one, but it's a smaller Japanese digital one that wants a JLPT 1. I know, which is actually that. For those that don't know, the JLPT is a Japanese government test designed to measure a foreigner's skill in the Japanese language, but we all know that it really kind of doesn't do that. It's much like SAT. It's how to take the test that matters. And so when people say, I want a JLPT N1, which is the highest currently you can get, or I want an N2, which is the second highest, there's not a whole lot you're actually demanding there. You're just demanding that you understand, like, nonfiction basic, how sentences work, how sentences are constructed. But the moment you throw that at somebody that's never done fiction before, it is a disaster. It really is. So it's there. I'd say that this year we're definitely seeing like a lessening of how to for translators at least how to fill their project list um, without exploitation. I'd say that the exploitative measures have gone up just because the economy's gone down. And while it was pretty high while the economy wasn't awful, it's kind of just gotten worse.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know, we can talk about like the economy and COVID, or like how COVID has impacted things a little later, but just since we're already kind of covering some headier topics, how about what you all feel are challenges within the freelancing fields right now? Let's start with Jan.
Right now, I mean, so this is something that I struggle with all the time. But taxes and administrative stuff is actually just an ever-present struggle. But yeah, I think that regarding our current climate, having to stay indoors all day and not having the convention season has also been very detrimental because usually, we usually get together, like all the freelancers get together to talk. We also talk to our editors, publishers, and also just sort of network during conventions, and we haven't been able to do that this year. I think that that's also been something that's been very negative for people who have been trying to get started in the industry, because usually that's my first like go-to advice is to go to a convention and just try to meet people and talk to people. But that hasn't applied this year at all.
I mean, I would say that, you know, especially because publishers sometimes just never reply to you at all. I have to agree with Jan here, and me, Jan, Brandon, and some of the other freelancers tend to have get-togethers during AX every year, and we tend to all hang out either with each other or with our editors or publishers, and we kind of, you know, we hang out because we're friends, but we also hang out so we can build connections. Yeah, I have to agree.
Do you think that's mostly because of just lack of work from the publishers, or like what do you think the reasoning is for maybe I should rephrase that. Is like the lack of communication also happening when it's in reference to work that's already assigned, or is it just for looking for new work?
I mean, looking for new work, I'd say, like, I've had experiences with multiple publishers now that are among the big 6 or 7, and sometimes I just never get replies at all. And I think it's a staffing issue, because lean staffing is definitely, like, not helping the communication process. But, you know, I mean, like, sometimes publishers will put out calls via Twitter, which I do have to recommend for networking, because it definitely does help.
That's how I got in.
Yeah, exactly. And they can be so inundated by responses, it's the same result.
I've seen that happen time and time again.
Yeah, I feel that, like, obviously DENPA is really small, but and I shouldn't necessarily speak for the larger publishers, but given how some of those businesses are structured, like if you're mainly just talking to one specific person, you know, obviously they'll have their own assignments, right? But without having the team around to maybe discuss what is open as frequently, maybe some of those conversations just kind of slip through the cracks, because it's like, oh, yeah, I got that email, but I don't have anything.
I mean, I just don't think that they're happening at all, though, in some cases. Just because, not necessarily falling through the cracks, though, because some of these publishers have had this issue now for like 2, 3, 4 years, where it's kind of just gotten worse.
And specifically when it comes to I guess to COVID, has like your workflow or just like the amount of work changed, or even just communication changed for any of you? I know that internally a lot of the offices are very different now. Obviously, you know, not many companies are going into the office at this point. Like interdepartmental communication is a lot slower, just because the actual meeting of other people is now kind of scheduled. You know, you have to take time to go meet up on Zoom or whatever online service that you're using to meet face to face, or just talk instead of walking over to someone else's office or whatever. So, you know, for all of you all that tend to work freelance and are already kind of a little distantly removed from like the day-to-day that happens in the office. Has that changed at all for you all, or is this something that is pretty much stayed consistent throughout all this? Throughout these last like 6 months or so.
I would say that it's mostly consistent, but the biggest change for me is that I get emails that are not within the typical 9 to 5 structure as often. I'll have people email me at all manner of hours, and I'm like, I know it's 1 a.m. where you are right now. What are you doing? Yeah, I'm just like, I mean, I'm just as bad because I'm awake to see this email, but that's because I'm freelance and I'm used to working at all manners of, all hours of the night. But as far as workload, if anything, I've been taking on more projects, which is good. But I am also, with how the economy is and could go, it's like, what does that mean for manga publishing? How is every publisher going to adapt to that? And that will, influence like the kinds of and the amount of projects that I can take on. It hasn't negatively affected me yet, but I'm always aware of the situation. Like there's always the possibility that a publisher is going to cut down, or like I might have to start looking for things elsewhere. But currently speaking, like it's just been kind of staying the course, thankfully.
Well, that's good.
I've also noticed that my project load has gone up slightly. For example, I think that the digital, the things that sell well digitally, publishers are focusing more on that. So, for example, I was asked to speed up the translation of one of the light novels that they were releasing digital first, and then would be releasing as a physical later.
I was going to say, in my case, it's funny because so I lost my grandmother at the beginning of the year, and late last year, my family knew she was kind of on her way out, and I worked a day job while taking on freelance on the side for a good at least 2 years, 2.5 years. And my employer was not very understanding, and because it was December, it was blackout season for retail, and I worked retail. And they basically said, well, you can quit, and then you can get unemployment, or or you can go see your grandmother. We can fire you, and then you won't get anything. So at that point, I was panicking, and a friend of mine hooked me up with subtitling, which was my first way of doing it. So, and after my grandmother died, I did inherit some little bit of cushion. So for me, projects have actually gone up, but also my productivity has gone up because I'm no longer splitting my personal energy between day job to make rent and then freelancing to feed everything else. But everything kind of happened at a very interesting time. So for me now, the issue with freelancing, and I know almost everybody here knows this, is you have to scaffold projects. And that's the hardest skill to acquire. And I thought I had done pretty well within like the 2.5 year span where I was doing double duty. But now that I'm doing it full time, I'm having to be like, okay, how much energy do I have? How much time do I have? And then there are also the jobs that make you wonder, like, is this worth my time and energy? And considering like what deadlines look like and what, how all of that is going. But thankfully this year my workload has increased, but my productivity has as well, as a result of these very interesting, unfortunate situations.
And in general, I mean, I suppose getting more work is a positive, but nothing, no negatives in regards to COVID at all.
It certainly is a mental strain, but dealing with the horrors of the world. But yeah, as far as specifically work things, it's not too bad.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, at least internally, it's very different. In some ways, it's a little bit of progress, particularly dealing with Japan in some capacity. But there are a lot of issues with printers these days being really swamped. There's also issues with the retailers like Barnes and Noble, and Diamond for a little while. Amazon's now having issues, and so it's been weird. And then, like I said a little while ago, not being able to be in direct contact with people you're working on these projects with, it really slows down the process by a lot. Just even getting through revisions and approvals and things like that. Like even little details like Brandon bringing up, people being up at different times of day and they're on different schedules. Like like that also impacts things too, because not everyone's on the same schedule at this point. And it's, people are at home, and, in some cases people have family and kids and things like that may be taking them away during the 9-to-5 grind. So, there's no blame there, obviously, but these are all little factors that do kind of add up and create a weird little strain or so.
Yeah, like for me, like this is less with manga, but with like freelance clients in marketing, one of the things that's happened with me with some clients has been a lot more of a shift towards evening meetings. And I'm like flexible with that kind of stuff anyway, but like more likely than not, like I would pretty regularly with clients, I would go into offices to meet people, but it's been more of like, all right, well, if I'm working with someone, we usually end up meeting rather than like in an afternoon or something like you would expect. It would be something in the evening hour, so something like 7 or later PM, which like is fine for me because I'm up till 2 a.m. anyway. But like, it's like it's an appreciable change in how I interact with people just beyond just emails. And it's just like, people, for a lot of people, because of factors like children and other responsibilities, especially when kids aren't in schools and stuff, like your whole life kind of gets shifted around.
Yeah.
Like work hours don't mean a thing when you aren't capable of working from 9 to noon because you got to sit and watch your kid at digital first grade or something like that. So everything becomes a late night project at that point.
We've only got about 10, maybe
got about 15.
Yeah. So got a couple more questions. We can go through relatively quickly. I guess it's we have people from different elements of the localization process. This might be a little tricky topic, but if you were to sit down and go talk to, say, a letterer and you're a translator or a proofreader, or if you want to sit down and talk to an editor, are there any suggestions that you would want to share with each other in your different work capacity to make your own situation a lot smoother? And what I mean by that is, one thing that I kind of end up noticing online, and even at times when talking to freelancers in person, is that there's always like a little bit of, I know this part of what I do, but I kind of get this beforehand, or the project that I ended up collecting from a middleman is not quite as smooth as I would like it. Then you kind of realize that, all the way through the process, all the way through the chain, there are these little kinks. It's like I said, it's a complicated topic, but are there any little things about the whole localization process that you would maybe, from your perspective, want to see adjusted or have questions about?
In my case, actually, I got to do this with the letterer for the project that is out later this year via DENPA, because she's already a friend. And so we had actually a really excellent back and forth of, she was like, she'd be sending me screen caps of her work as a letterer saying, does this look like the original? How should I fix it? And I mean, I don't really know letterer lingo very well, so I couldn't really give her that much feedback there. But I would say, like build it up a little bit more, make it like a little bit more, make words more chunky. Like it's actually been a really fascinating process. And I really hope I get to do it again soon, because there's really, I mean, well, one, you always love working with friends, like if it goes well. And two, it was really educational, and it was just weirdly very satisfying is the only way I can put it. But I mean, if for like about a month or so, we've had several back and forths today of how does this look, or mindless screaming because it won't look the way everybody wants it to look a certain way and it won't look that way. And it's more like I need to blow pressure off right now because I'm about to explode. But it was really good. It's just like a long string of A's, just kind of like, well, I want to do the thing I needed to do. But I mean, it was really good because, she was asking me lots of questions of, well, does this go with the tone of X, Y, and Z, or does this look like it? And I could say, like, looking at the original, like, you need to do like this, or you need to do it like that. Sometimes we just had like a debate back and forth of, well, I like if I was given multiple options, I like A, well, I like B, but why? So we had a fair amount of communication. I don't think people get to have very often when they're in this industry. And the industry is small, and I am very lucky and blessed to have friends in all areas of the industry. But this is the first time I've had, an experience working with somebody who's been, my friend since the LiveJournal years. So like way back when. And it was just genuinely really enlightening. So it was less of, I'd say, like necessarily a conversation, but it was more like we were just kind of working out all of those kinks that I just referenced in the process. So
just really quick, any very specific thing that you could bring up? Because I like the general story there, but do you recall something that really was eye-opening to you, at least from the letterer's perspective?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, was, you had reminded me that I do need to consider, when I translate, sometimes I do need to consider the letterer's perspective. And she kind of reinforced that. She was like, like this was a little difficult to letter, or I can't get it to fit in the bubble. And it was stuff like that. So it was a lot of stuff that when you translate, you expect the editor to do that work for you. And now that we're in this COVID era of, we can't, like the way staffing is right now, we can't always rely on that editor to be there. And we need to like think about it more, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, like specifically because I think, and it's kind of cool that this is something that you and I worked on, and to kind of give the listener a little bit of inside baseball. It really depends on the publishing house. So in general, and this is kind of why, like when you were going through that tale initially, I was like, oh, I'm glad we're having this conversation right now, because the funny thing here is, I guess neither of you guys are aware that I'm going to still be changing all of that later. And so it's like the production manager who's working on it. So while some of that is definitely going to be really helpful, and it's obviously a learning experience too. Yeah, like so for example, in our case, we don't do the cutting. We do one round of cutting just for like the script when we get that in, and then once everything's lettered, it goes to the production manager, and then they'll reformat all the files, send it back to the editor, which in this case would be me, and then I would chop, and that will go through about 4 or 5 pass-throughs.
I think that's probably more than most companies.
We go through a lot of pass-throughs, yeah.
With 7Cs, you basically just do the thing, hand it off, and the editor will give you a list of stuff you need to fix, and then that's all you hear from, basically. So
yeah, and then it goes back to the production director, and they'll do another read through, and it will go to the proofreader, and then then in this case I will read through it one last time for consistency, and it will get printed. It's a lot of back and forth, but the idea there is
quality assurance. Yeah. What's really baffling is that some companies are cutting editorial positions, and I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? We need quality assurance when we work. because I know that I've been like out of my mind on a deadline and like writing a sentence that makes sense to me, but when the editor looks at it, they're like, "What is going on here?" So when you don't have that, yeah, you lose a really big cushion of quality assurance and all of that. So,
Do the rest of you have any examples like that you may like to share with anybody else, or?
Quite a few.
Okay.
Well, we talked earlier about translators having to be aware of lettering while they're writing their scripts, and
Bubbles.
yeah, fairly often actually. I can tell personally whenever a translator is making those considerations or not.
Yep.
And I've definitely had to work with some fantastically wordy translators on some just brutally difficult manga panels because I guess for any listeners who might not be aware, unlike lettering for Western comics, where it's the letterer who gets to decide like the word balloon size and the word balloon placement. In manga, those are generally like hard baked into the art. They're hand drawn into the art. We cannot move them. We have to work within those constraints. And not only that, but since Japanese reads, vertically and right to left, it can mean that a lot of the word balloons can be just like vertical and very thin. They're just a vertical oval, very thin, which is very bad for English. So you can tell whenever a translator is not making those considerations, and they've got this like nice novel typed up that is supposed to fit in like this tiny little bubble, and you're just like, well, I can fit it in there, but you're going to need a magnifying glass, and it's going to look ugly. I would say that is probably my most common issue. There have been other instances where just due to lack of communication, maybe like publisher style guides as far as like text formatting, sound effect formatting aren't being followed in the ways that they should be. And a lot of that is time constraints. The editor, if they're looking over the script, they don't have time to look over that sort of stuff. But it tends to be the letterer who has to either fix those things or leave them alone and like kind of shrug your shoulders until the editor like those in my experience tend to be the most common issues that can be fixed with just like kind of simple communication. Yeah. And so I always prefer it if I have any sort of like contact for the translator on the project I'm working on. I'll just if I have a question or just be like, hey, you missed this, just it can be quicker to ask them as opposed to like trying to use the editor as a liaison while also not like trying to chastise the editor for being like, hey, you gave me this jank script, what's wrong with you? I always prefer, if I can, talking to the translator about those sorts of things. But other times, depending on the manga, it just like sometimes you just can't help it. Like you gotta make some decisions that might not look great, but English is the English lettering is a compromise with the Japanese art, as I say.
Any situations like that for you, Jan?
I mean, I used to work as an editor, not for manga specifically, but a little bit of stuff that had to be translated and was in manga form. And yeah, trying to cut down words. Also for that position, we actually did all the lettering in-house rather than having a letterer. So we would pass things back and forth many, many times. Like I would read over a script like 7 times, and I was just the first editor. That was normal for the publishing house that I was at. Yeah, but I think that the biggest thing that I would like to see change is more communication, like Brandon and Molly were both saying, because I usually don't have much communication even with the editor. Like they'll take the script and then they'll put it through edits and they'll send it to the letterer, or they might send it directly to the letterer. But usually it's sort of a black box until I get it in my hands in physical form and I get to flip through it. So sometimes I'll see some surprises there. Usually improvements, but sometimes there might be like an editor who only knows English, and they're very, very good at writing prose and restructuring things, but there might be a word that I thought meant something, and then they would interpret it as something completely different. it would be nice to be able to talk to people about those sorts of things, and to sort of like have another review of the script just to get feedback, and also to have some more input just in case things get changed.
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to go into that, but I think increasingly, even with schedules being a lot tighter, like I wanted to go into the topic of like just a lot more manga becoming or manga coming in digital format first, or the increase of even simulpubs now. I think the turnaround for editorial or even just going back and forth is getting lost now, increasingly, right? Because there just isn't time in some cases. That's not the case for everything, obviously, but I feel that because of that, more and more publishers are possibly just going to lean on doing some of that more internally and just going with what they got, right? Not exclusively with just like simulpubs too. It's like, okay, well, if that kind of worked in this case, maybe it will just work in this other case. That's being a little cynical, obviously, but I think that Pandora's box is kind of open now. So
I think it is for sure, where I think there is an appreciable, like, frankly, like, quality difference in a lot of those cases. And I don't think there is a lot of pushback for that.
That's the other thing too. I don't think the customer is really pushing back on it.
So especially with a lot of like digital first stuff and like digital only stuff, I don't think you see much pushback at all. So in a lot of ways, that kind of creates like a vicious cycle where it's like, okay, so maybe we don't need to check something 7 times before we release it or something like that, because, well, the guy lettered it. I guess that's good enough. Or someone checked it once, and I guess that's good enough. And now we can just put it on the website.
I mean, I can say that for the Kodansha contractor I worked with, they were digital first only. Because Kodansha now is structured, the various contractors do various things and only those things. They wanted 2 scripts a month out of me, and then that was thrown up on the website and on Amazon and everywhere within like 2 weeks, and that includes both lettering and editing. And then it would only get to the checker like a month after the fact, and that whole thing was its own whole thing. But there's very, depending on the contractor, there's almost no editorial at all. It's really, I was stunned. I was like, I mean, I haven't been doing this very long, but is this okay? I think I actually asked my editor that. I was like, no, like, why is Kodansha JP? You sit right next to the person you need to give the files to. What is going on here? But, digital first is basically, it's kind of becoming this zero-sum game where it's a race to the bottom. How do we get it out cheaper, faster, easier? How do we get more people to like it? It's really kind of frustrating, I think, from a lot of people in this industry in various jobs are really frustrated about this. I know I am.
I mean, it's especially like because it's so much of this quickly released, kind of frankly dumped out. I was going to use a different word. Stuff like digital only stuff. What you end up is just with a glut of content that no one even knows exists. And on top of the fact that it's lower quality, like it's harder for people to learn about it or like be like interested in it, find it, and then a lot of time, and then they might land on something that sounds interesting, and the quality might not be like the best of what people are actually looking for. And I think all of those things can and probably are a little bit already starting to pile up on each other.
Yeah.
I don't want to close out on something so dire. So really quick, how do you guys just feel about the industry as a whole right now? Yeah, I hope this isn't also going to be negative.
Well, I'll preface my statement by saying that my view of the industry is very limited because I'm a freelancer, and I feel like, as my experience, this is way more than a couple sentences already, but, I'm not privy to the same information that, a lot of editors and in-house people have. So I just I'm working with the same tools as the readers plus like 5% more. But I think that on a positive note, there are so many comics out there for people to read that are for all different kinds of readers, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that despite COVID, the reader base and the fans have been able to show their resilience and their support, which as somebody who relies on that support, I cannot be thankful enough for. So that's how I'm feeling currently.
Anybody else want to hop in on that?
I mean, I would say from the in terms of good things, I think that the industry's place has been very solidly solidified by the appearance of COVID, because I know that when it started happening and a lot of platforms, including Futeki and Manga Planet, started offering, 1 month free, Fuku did another month, or was it 2 weeks? I can't remember. But that solidified the customer base, and we saw a definite increase in subscription. So we definitely have more interest, I think, than we've ever had. But we have to balance that out with how the sausage is made. And I think a lot more people are taking interest in how that sausage is made now. But the positive thing is, when I grew up during the late 90s manga boom, and we never had this much content. It's honestly a beautiful thing to see.
Before the last bubble burst, we were getting about the same. But yeah, it's been a while.
I would say it's not so much that we're getting more content, but I think we're getting a better spread of content.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's the best way to say it. Yeah.
The overall quality I think is higher, but then also genre options are so much better than they were during the last bubble. There's so much I think one of the better examples of this is all the LGBT stuff, positive stuff that's available in English now, and that was more or less not a thing last time around.
Yeah, BL was just starting around that time, and it was just very specific, But you wouldn't get essay manga or things like Lesbian Experience.
You wouldn't get something like Lesbian Experience being a hit, for that matter.
Yeah,
which is amazing, honestly. I mean, things like that could get awards, right? Drifting Life. I guess that was a hit too, but not in the same type of way. Anything quick from you, Jan?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about the industry, just because there's so many new smaller publishers coming up, even though they're digital first or digital only. They're trying to diversify the industry, I think. And also, I think that simulpubs are actually a positive thing, just because I think that that's probably helping combat scanlations. Yeah, so I think that that's also a good development, even with all the issues that it comes with.
And then just really quick to close out, any titles you guys are working on right now that you want to pimp out to give a shout out to? Let's start off with Pat.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to tell people that they need to go buy Heavenly Delusion, because it's the best comic being published in English right now. And I'm not saying that because you're the publisher, Ed.
Or Brandon's the letterer.
Yeah. I was a fan of that comic before it got licensed. You know this, and it means a lot to me. And I think it's crazy that it's not being talked about more. That's all I'm going to say.
I work on volume 2 onwards, so I'm going to pimp that as well. Whenever that comes out, peep my work.
Yeah, volume 2 should be coming out, I think, around January. We're going to start working on that pretty soon. Obviously, it's already lettered, but a lot of, we had COVID and we had a lot of internal stuff to deal with. So our schedule, at least for DENPA, was pushed back for most of the spring. But I won't say back on track, but we're actually now. Molly?
So I had the privilege of working on Oshimi Sensei's Shino Can't Say Her Own Name. And I think that this particular project definitely pushed me further to up my game and to actually better myself within the industry that way. And I'm also a neurodivergent person, and we're bringing content that's very close to that, I'd say, especially with Shino. So it's definitely what people used to call an issues book, and I'm really excited for people to,
Yeah, that's like kind of going back towards like what Pat was saying.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is Oshimi, right? So it's not a shock that it would get translated, but the subject matter isn't standard Oshimi either.
It isn't, no.
It's not just drama, even though, it is dramatic. So I think it'll be very interesting for people.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So.
And how about you, Jan?
Yeah, I got two. So one is Last Round Arthurs, which is a light novel and manga series. Very, very short, just only 5 volumes. And then the other one is Kuma 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 Bear, which is just about bears. That's literally it. It's just bears all the way down.
Can we get that as like the print copy? It's just about bears. No, literally, that's it. Because I feel like that would be very fitting.
I mean, it's like the bare necessities.
Oh God.
Just a little bit of background here. I've known Jen for a little while, but she specifically came to me wanting to take on Baby Bear's Bakery because she wants to do all the bear manga out there. I'd like to thank my panelists for joining me today. It was a treat. It was a pleasure, and I think it was really cool being able to hear all your perspectives all at once. We kind of do this sometimes at events, but like the average reader doesn't experience this, right? They don't get to hear some of these conversations. So I think this is a really cool opportunity to share some of that with the customer base. And just to close out, like I said, thank you to all the guests. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel, and who knows, maybe we'll come back for another roundtable at the next Kurotsuki Con. Bye.